So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bernadette Graham Hudson. I am the Wildlife Division Administrator here at the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I would like to welcome you to this first meeting of our technical review process for the revision of our State Wildlife Action Plan. Hopefully most of you were able to join us last week as we kicked off our community engagement process. And at that meeting, we provided an overview of both this technical review process as well as the broader public engagement. And today we'll be focusing on the technical review by our partner organizations. If you were not able to attend last week, that meeting was recorded and it is posted on our SWAP revision website. Today's meeting will also be recorded and posted there after the meeting. So if you know others that weren't able to attend, please direct them to the website to watch today's meeting. I wanted to start out by orienting you to some of the way we have today's meeting set up. We have several members of our team present today to share information and to answer questions. In addition to myself, we have a few folks online that will be here to either present or help answer questions. So if you folks could turn on your cameras for a minute as I introduce you. So we have Carolyn Eckrich, who is our SWAP revision coordinator. We also have Emily Van Wyk, who's our SWAP or Oregon Conservation Strategy coordinator. We have Beth Quillian from our Information Education division here at ODFW. And then we also have some members of some of our other divisions. We have Michelle Weaver from our Fish Division, Greg Krutzkowski from our Marine Program, and I believe Janelle St. Pierre is here from our Habitat Division as well. So as we discussed last week, we will be referring to the Oregon State Wildlife Action Plan today. This plan was previously known as the Oregon Conservation Strategy. And one of the changes that we are doing as we revise the plan is to adopt the terminology that's nationally used for the state wildlife action plans going forward. So we'll be referring to it as the State Wildlife Action Plan today, or the SWAP. That is synonymous with the Oregon Conservation Strategy. So we'll share content today, and then we will also have an opportunity for questions later in the meeting. We will turn the chat off during the presentations, but we'll open it up again when we get to the Q&A portion. And not knowing how many questions we'll have and what time we'll have to get through those, we'll do a little bit of curating those questions, but please feel free to put those questions in the chat at that time. And if we don't get to your question today, we can follow up with you directly or cover that at a future meeting if it is appropriate. So. Let me look at my notes here. I just wanted to also highlight that some of the material that you'll see today will be a recap of last week's meeting as well, in case folks weren't able to join. That'll help set the stage for the technical review. So hopefully that will be a good review of an overview of the process, and then we can get into the technical review details as well. And so with that, I will turn it over to Carolyn.
Okay, thank you so much, Bernadette, and thank you again for joining us today. I am very grateful for all of you who have chosen to spend your time with us this afternoon. This meeting is our introduction to the partner technical review process. It is intended for agencies, tribes, and organizations who plan and implement natural resource conservation actions, and a reminder that a public meeting will be offered in March for a more general audience. On the agenda today, as Bernadette mentioned, because not everyone was at our meeting last week or was able to watch the recording, we wanted to begin by reviewing the SWAP revision process. We'll also be reviewing the partner engagement process and the timeline for that. We will then discuss our approach to revising focal areas of the SWAP and be giving more details on tracks, which are our topic-specific meetings, and how to indicate your interest in a particular track, and then the next steps for the partner technical review. So the Oregon State Wildlife Action Plan, or SWAP, is an overarching state strategy for conserving fish and wildlife. Its purpose is to help people make decisions more strategically about how they can invest time and resources in fish and wildlife conservation. The goals of the swap are to maintain healthy fish and wildlife populations by maintaining and restoring functioning habitats, preventing declines of at-risk species, and reversing declines in these resources where possible. The swap emphasizes proactively conserving declining species and habitats to reduce the possibility of future federal or state listings. It is not a regulatory document, but instead presents issues, opportunities, and recommended voluntary actions that will improve the efficiency and effectiveness of conservation in Oregon. The swap relies not only on internal use to direct our agency's work, but also partner work and support. Because of that, partner engagement is key to ensuring success, and making sure that this document is usable for our partners and the public is one of the reasons we are taking the opportunity to revise the swap. We have several overarching goals for the swap revision. A lot has changed over the past 10 years, which is the last time most of this information was updated, and we'll be making sure that the information we provide is up to date, accurate, and complete by reviewing and revising content. One of our main goals for updating the State Wildlife Action Plan is to create a comprehensive picture of the current challenges and opportunities for conservation of our fish and wildlife and their habitats, and what we anticipate for the future. To accomplish this, we want to incorporate new science, data, tools, and resources. We want to more fully consider climate change throughout all components. Climate change is a major influence on our species and habitats, and our understanding of this issue has definitely changed over the last 10 years. Because this is one of the most significant threats to species and habitats in Oregon for both our agency and our partners, we will be exploring ways to incorporate this into our swap revision. We want to update available resources and tools. We want to provide tools and resources that will provide people with sufficient knowledge, support, and motivation to be able to take advantage of existing opportunities to act. By doing this, we ensure that we can all execute projects and take actions that will directly benefit all of Oregon's natural resources. We'll also update the SWAP website in Compass, which is our online mapping tool. This allows our web platforms to incorporate new technologies and increase functionality while maintaining accessibility. I wanted to spend some time walking through the entire timeline of the revision to review some key elements of the process. The red, orange, and yellow section of the timeline represent 2023 and 2024, and that outlines what we've done since the revision process began. The process officially kicked off in 2023. Since then, we have completed an extensive internal review and began our outreach with a series of presentations to partner groups and outreach events. We also completed a survey for partners and the public to provide input on the existing swap and what they would like to see updated. For the last half of 2024, our staff worked hard to update the swap, incorporating the feedback we had received to date to produce first drafts of updated sections. And now for the exciting part, which is what we have planned for 2025, and that's represented in green. Last week, we held our community engagement kickoff meeting and outlined the two primary audiences for the swap revision. Basically, as I said, if you are from federal, state, and local agencies or tribes or organizations that are working in conservation, you are a technical partner, and I hope that we are engaging with you today. Then there is the more general public audience, who are folks who don't do this as their job every day, but are still looking for information or want to connect to conservation opportunities in their area. We are here on January 13th at the Partner Technical Review Introduction. Starting in March, we will begin our public-focused outreach and education sessions. Following this meeting today, starting in February, we will begin holding a series of technical review workgroup sessions. These topic-specific meetings will focus on discussing and reviewing specific sections of the swap. More on these in a minute. Our staff will work to incorporate the feedback that we receive throughout this process to complete a final draft of the swap at the beginning of July. That allows us to submit the final draft to the ODFW Commission for approval at the August Commission meeting. And finally, the swap is due to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on October 1st, 2025. Following submission, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will develop a technical review team that will approve the revision in 2026. As you just saw in the timeline, our staff have worked on a first draft of a revised plan, and now is the time to add your technical expertise to ensure that the 2025 swap will be the most accurate, highly functional tool for the state to reach our goals. Some of the things we hope to achieve through our partner outreach are: we want to highlight the valuable knowledge that many people already have, acknowledging that technical experts may have more and better information. Your input on what we've done to date and what additional information or ideas should be considered will help to enhance the information provided to support cohesive conservation action. This also helps us to ensure information and tools provided are useful to our partners. We want the plan to welcome and inspire all of those who do conservation work. The usefulness of this plan hinges on the cooperative nature of actions and implementation. The SWAP can only be successful in implementing effective conservation action with broad support and buy-in from partners. And looking ahead, just to reiterate the partner-focused timeline, last week was our kickoff of the community engagement process. We hope that we successfully conveyed what a crucial role you play in Oregon SWAP as part of our broad network of partners. Today, we will introduce what we have planned for technical review. As you saw in the agenda, we will talk in more detail about the review process, how we will be scheduling topic-specific meetings, and how you can identify your areas of interest and expertise. We will also review some of the proposed revisions to the SWAP and key areas where we are looking for partner science and feedback. From February to May, we will be holding these topics-focused work group meetings. During the meetings, ODFW staff will lead participants through proposed updates to specific sections and will solicit feedback on the revised content. Today, we'll be talking about how you can express your interest in these focused meetings. So now I want to zero in a little bit on what the process looks like going forward from today. As you have heard, we have chosen to host a series of topic-focused work group meetings. We are currently proposing to host meetings on topics in these 5 focal areas. Since the Oregon Nearshore Strategy will be fully integrated, I just want to remind that marine components will be found throughout these focal areas. The final list of meeting topics may look very different from this, but these are the focal areas in which we expect to choose topics. These meetings will be hosted as sections of the SWAP are concurrently released on ODFW's revision website. At the meeting, ODFW staff will lead participants through proposed updates and will solicit feedback on the revised content. Meeting participants will be able to make comments, ask questions, and discuss proposed changes to the SWAP during the sessions. Work groups will meet on teams with the objective of incorporating partner science and expertise. Meetings will take place between February and May. Updates will be sent out and posted to our website as meetings are scheduled. Our staff will incorporate the feedback we receive through this process to complete a final draft of the SWAP at the beginning of July. We will be organizing meetings based on interest forms. This allows us to gauge the level of interest in a particular area and narrow or expand the focus of meetings based on anticipated interest. We will be providing more details on how to express interest in a particular area after we review our approach to revising these focal areas of the SWAP. I will also note that you do not have to be part of the topic-focused meetings to participate in the technical review. Partners may also choose not to attend the meetings and instead provide review of released content via the online comment form. This is also an option for those who may not be a technical expert in a particular field, but still want to review content, and that will be available on the website. And with that, I will hand it over to Emily.
All right. Thank you, Carolyn. So at the end here, we'll be providing guidance on how to sign up for those technical review tracks. And I'd like to really take this time to provide detail on how each of the broad technical focal areas we're looking for feedback, so just to give you a foundation of understanding of where you might want to plug into those tracks. So we're going to start here first with our SWAP species, because in a lot of ways, species are the ground floor of our state wildlife action plan. We used a process intended to be transparent, robust, and repeatable to identify species included within our SWAP. We'll walk through each of these categories up here on the screen to provide a little bit more information on what those classifications mean, how we're using them, and how you can help us refine our draft. So our species of greatest conservation need, or our SGCNs, are the species that we've identified as having imperiled conservation status, and they're what we previously referred to as strategy species. The name change, similar to the name change of the plan, will help us be more in line with national terminology and will facilitate the use of our plan by partners that cross state boundaries. The next big group is our species of greatest information need, or our SGIN. These are the species for which we just don't know enough about them to determine their status. These are the ones we've previously referred to as data gap species. And our other third big bucket is everything else. So there are a number of ways that we're including species that aren't either SGIN or SGCN within the revised SWAP. As we all know, there are a lot of species that are key to informing conservation actions in the state that don't fall neatly into either of the previous two categories. We're going to dig a little bit further into the species than the other technical review focal areas, as we're really wanting to tee up that species list. This is the first item that we're releasing for review, and you can anticipate this draft list in the next day or so. So next slide, please. So let's take a closer look at the SGCN selection criteria. Staff led a comprehensive process to revise the criteria for selection of our species of greatest conservation need in 2023 and 2024. The conservation criteria that we developed were based on the criteria used both in 2006 and 2016, with some minor changes to make them more inclusive of all taxonomic groups. In previous iterations of our State Wildlife Action Plan, different criteria were used for different taxonomic groups, which often became quite confusing. Our end result was 4 criteria that were applied to all potential SGCN, and species assessed must meet 2 or more of the 4 criteria to be included as SGCN. These are incredibly simplified here. The complete definitions are included within the species list that will be circulating shortly. And we'll be reviewing this in depth with people who are interested in participating in that species track. Broadly, those criteria are that the species are vulnerable to threats due to life history traits or ecological characteristics of the species. They have a population that's low or declining, a restricted distribution, or the population is impacted by those major threats like disease or invasive species or climate change. And those criteria are really intended to identify species that are most at risk in Oregon and for which timely implementation of conservation measures to address existing or potential threats is really needed to prevent them from declining to the point of qualifying as either threatened or endangered. Next slide. ODF&W staff reviewed species for which we have statutory authority, and we reached out to our external partners with expertise for the species we don't work on. Overall, we assessed a total of 629 species of amphibians, birds, fish, reptiles, mammals, invertebrates, plants, and algae. So far, a total of 76 species have been added. One thing that I'd really like to highlight here is that a large portion of those new species are invertebrates and plants. While we included invertebrates and plants in earlier versions of our State Wildlife Action Plan, we were able to be more inclusive of those taxonomic groups this round. We also removed 28 species. And so some of those removals were because of recovery, but many others were because we tried to make sure that our SGCN criteria were clear and consistent and reflected our species most at risk in the state. Many of those species that we did remove from that SGCN list are still included within the SWAP, either as success stories or as callouts within other chapters to help provide more information for conservation partners. I'll point out a few examples in the next slide. Through this process, we also identified 101 species of greatest information need. Again, these are the species where not enough information is known to determine whether or not they meet the conservation criteria to qualify as SGCN. As we went through the assessment process under those 4 criteria, these were species where we didn't have enough information to really say yes or no to some of those selection criteria. And so that's how they ended up in that list. One challenge that we've identified previously with the use of these data gap species, now our SGIN, is that there's a real need for clear communication of exactly what that data gap is. So we can say we don't know enough, but is that it's not helpful unless we say these are the things that we need to know more about. So this is one area where we're really looking to improve resources that we provide. As an example of some of those changes for wildlife species, we've highlighted what information we need for each SGIN to facilitate moving them either off the list, so it turns out they're doing great, or onto our SGCN list. Our ask within the species focus track is for partners and experts to help us make sure that we have all of the relevant, up-to-date information, for help reviewing and revising threats and conservation actions to make sure that they reflect available information, and to help us make sure that we didn't miss any species for assessment under those 4 criteria. Next slide. As I've mentioned, there are a number of species with secure populations that don't meet the criteria for SGCN or SGIN, but there's other reason for us to focus conservation actions on those species. Examples include things like indicator species, like they can serve as the canary in the coal mine for new threats. umbrella species that can help us to inform where and how to restore habitats to benefit a wider group of species, and species that gather in large concentrations or that maybe only briefly stop over in Oregon on their migration, but for which we have an important role in their whole life cycle. There are a number of other examples too. We wanted to make sure that these species are described in the revised SWOP and that we can provide information about them to help support our partners and the public interested in advancing conservation. Using beaver as an example, we'll dig in a little bit further here. American beaver were assessed for inclusion on the species of greatest conservation need list, again, formerly our strategy species, under those 4 criteria. Through that assessment, we did not find them to meet the definition of an SGCN. However, with the recognition of the important role that beaver play in modifying habitats and benefiting other species, we will address beaver in multiple areas throughout the revised SWOP. Both beaver habitat, so habitat for beavers, and beaver modified habitats, habitat by beaver, include components of several distinct vegetation communities, including riparian areas, wetlands, aspen woodlands, and others. Including information on beavers and their influence within those relevant habitats will help us to showcase the important role that they play. We also recognize that beaver activity is a type of natural disturbance regime, and we're expanding information on that within the Disruption to Disturbance Regimes KCI to help us enhance communication of that and highlight the key role that beavers play at the landscape scale. Another example is within the marine realm. So marine program, ODF&W identified a need to flag additional species of interest that didn't meet the criteria for inclusion as an SGCN, including both species of economic interest and species of social, cultural, or recreational interest. These are being included as a supplementary nearshore list that's also under review. Next slide. Our next focal area is the key habitats identified within the SWOP. A reanalysis of habitat loss, which is the first step in the process to identify habitats of conservation concern, hasn't been conducted since the late 1990s. And so this was our priority during the 2025 revision period. We're focusing our efforts on assessing the feasibility of updating the analysis of change in the extent of vegetation types since European settlement. This analysis was originally used as the first step of the process that established our key habitats in 2005. We also prioritized for this revision updating information on key habitats, including threats and conservation actions, and highlighting the importance of the American beaver, beaver habitat, and beaver modified habitats in appropriate habitat types like wetlands and riparian areas. For this revision, we're also updating our key habitat map to increase accuracy in the extent and distribution of those key habitats by incorporating new data and ground truthing existing vegetation types. Our ask for that habitat track is for folks that have habitat-specific expertise to help make sure that we're including all of the recent research and resources in the revised drafts and to update information provided on each one. Next slide. The next focal area is our key conservation issues, or our KCIs. These are large-scale conservation issues or threats affect or potentially affect many species and habitats over large landscapes throughout the state. One thing that we're especially excited about in this revision is that we've integrated threats that are identified both within the 2016 Oregon Nearshore Strategy and in the 2016 Oregon Conservation Strategy for a more comprehensive presentation on the broad threats impacting fish, wildlife, and their habitats. By moving these into the same documents, we're able to provide more inclusive information on how these threats impact all habitats and make this more accessible to end users. When we're thinking about these large landscape level impacts, it makes sense to consider marine and inland threats together. We're also proposing some large scale changes in our draft revisions. So we'll be adding a new KCI, pollution, and moving the information and challenges and opportunities for private landowners to the conservation toolbox to really elevate that topic and make it more readily accessible. We've also done an overhaul in the climate change KCI with the help of the Northwest Climate Adaptation Science Center to make sure that information is up to date and reflects the current state of available information on climate. We also updated all of the other KCIs and standardized the language used to describe threats, linking information back to the direct threats classification system to help end users connect with different naming structures between different states' wildlife action plans. Similar to other sections, our ask here is that we want to hear from our partners. Questions that we're asking are if these drafts effectively reflect newly available information, if there's anything missing, and if we're presenting the resources needed to support conservation action by our partners. Next slide. The Conservation Toolbox, which offers information and resources to support implementation, had the lowest scores for usefulness in our external survey in early 2024. Because the Conservation Toolbox received such a low score for usefulness in our survey, we really want to focus on restructuring the section to empower more Oregonians to be able to take voluntary conservation actions. We want to provide tools and resources that will provide people with sufficient capability, both the knowledge and skills and motivation to be able to take advantage of existing opportunities to act and better help connect folks in Oregon's communities to the conservation needs and opportunities that exist in their areas and the areas that they spend time in. We're moving information on challenges and barriers for landowners and land managers to implement conservation into that toolbox to elevate that section and have all of that information in one location. Other sections under that heading that we're working on reorganizing include conservation in urban areas, outreach and education, monitoring, and other similar resources. Since this is an area that we want to spend a lot of time updating, this is also an area where I want to emphasize a need for partner support. What do you think is missing? What are our opportunities to showcase what others are doing around the state and help make those connections? How can we better connect with new audiences and help them make that first step into becoming invested in conservation? Next slide. Our last focal area that we'll talk about today is our conservation opportunity areas. We know that these are heavily used by partners, and we received feedback that folks were concerned about COAs changing too dramatically in this revision. So our COAs are being updated for this revision by analyzing the existing COA boundaries within the context of updated data for various beneficial factors like species occurrences and habitat quality, as well as limiting factors like development and pollution. Marksan conservation planning software is being used to perform a cost-benefit analysis to determine optimal COA boundaries using the updated data. Part of the data preparation for input into Marksan has been the development of a statewide suitability index that identifies the most and the least valuable units, which are broken up into 1 square mile hexagons, for inclusion in the updated COAs. We'd like to provide an opportunity for our reviewers to give feedback on how well that index aligns with their knowledge of their local areas. We're asking that reviewers flag specific hexagons where the relative suitability provided significantly mismatches with what they see on the ground. So we say an area is good and you know that last year a fire completely decimated that landscape. Those are the kinds of details that we want to know. And it's really important for reviewers to understand that their feedback will be incorporated into the input for the Marksan cost-benefit analysis, and that resultant COA boundaries may or may not fully align with the feedback that they've provided. Reviewers may also have an opportunity to provide feedback on the draft COAs that result from that analysis at a separate stage of the revision process. In addition, reviewers may have an opportunity to provide feedback on the relative importance of various limitation factors that will be used to develop the suitability index. Next slide. As we move forward with our technical review, our intent is to hold technical work sessions with interested parties who can help us revise and shape the final document. What we envision will broadly follow these 5 main themes, though the final tracks will be responsive to the input that we receive. For instance, if there's a ton of interest from folks to help us review and revise our amphibian species list, we might have a standalone amphibian track. If there's no interest, we might lump in amphibians with reptiles or all wildlife species. Once folks sign up, we'll arrange tracks. If you don't respond, but you do want to participate, that's still okay. It does, however, mean that your responses won't inform the development of what tracks we offer. If you or partners miss that opportunity and have information to share, please contact Carolyn or myself through the revision inbox, and we can guide you towards the best track or opportunity to provide comment. I'll also encourage folks to help us connect with other partners and experts that may have feedback to provide. So we don't know who we don't know, and technical feedback from folks we don't have a long history of working with can be especially informative. Next slide. So here's the information on where the form is to sign up. We'll also be dropping this in the chat in a moment. And after our Q&A, which is just coming up, and as we wind down the meeting, we'll walk interested folks through the form if there are any questions about what that looks like. This form will be open through January 21. Again, if you don't manage to submit your answers before then, that's okay. It won't inform what tracks are offered, but you can still absolutely participate. If you have any challenges with this form, please reach out to the team through the revision inbox. We'll also drop that information in later. Just keep reaching out and help us to support your engagement with us. With that, I will hand it back to our moderator.
Thanks, Emily. So I have gone ahead and turned the chat back on. So if you have questions about any of the material that's been presented, you're welcome to put those questions here in the chat. We would ask you to try to focus those questions on the process and what's to come in our revision going forward. We know that you likely have some detailed questions about certain species or habitats, but I'd like to ask that maybe you hold those until those specialized track meetings so that we can spend some more time getting into detailed discussions about those. But certainly welcome your questions here in the chat. And I believe Carolyn has put the SWAP revision website there in the chat for you. I'm going to start by teeing up one question that we've gotten kind of through some other channels. And that question is, how will the name change from the Oregon Conservation Strategy to the State Wildlife Action Plan affect partners whose documents or rules specifically reference the Oregon Conservation Strategy? So there's a couple of things related to this that I wanted to highlight. So the first is that our SWAP revision timeline goes through the rest of this year up until we submit it to our commission for approval at their August meeting. And then we submit the final draft SWAP to the Fish and Wildlife Service in October. And we anticipate their approval would not come until sometime in the first half of 2026. So we have the whole rest of this year, as well as part of next year, to work with our partners to figure out where that terminology might need to be updated in any guidance documents or rules. So that's one thing, is we'll be working closely with partners to make sure we can get that terminology updated. And then the second is that the Oregon Conservation Strategy and the SWAP those terms are synonymous in our minds. So just recognize that the documents are the same, although different versions. And so if a guidance document doesn't get updated, we would of course still recognize that as the same document. So with that, I will go ahead and tee up one of the first questions we had in the chat there. And I'm going to ask Carolyn if she can respond to the first question, which is, how are you determining best available science?
Thanks, Bernadette. So we emphasize prioritizing information that adheres to the scientific process, and that means sound methodology and based on robust evidence that is relevant. And that means using the most up-to-date information where possible, and is considered reliable and accurate within its field. And for that, we're just looking for, papers that are highly cited, that people are using, that your cohort and coworkers have also accepted. And we utilize this process, the review process, to hear from the community and hear what they think is the best available science. And that's part of the whole reason we do the review. And as part of the review, we want our partners to make that information available to us in this process and bring that information to the table in those technical meetings or through the comment form on the website.
Thanks, Carolyn. So I'm going to direct the next question to Emily, just trying to give kind of back and forth here, give you a break in talking. Emily, will field surveys and collections be enough to fill data gaps, or are we looking at more in-depth and technical surveys or trainings?
That's a great question. There are a lot of species in Oregon that we don't know a lot about, even species that we know enough to know that they are at risk. And so there's a lot of information we need. I saw that question come up early, and so I was able to pull up our list of SGIN and information that we're looking for. And so for some of them, it's even as simple as, how big is the population? What are the trends? And so a lot of these questions are just the need to assess population trends or vital rates. Some of them too are questions about, well, what is the relative influence of a KCI on population dynamics? There are a lot of questions that we still have about the impacts of various pollutants to different species, and those questions will just become this churn as we move forward. And so we've been trying to identify these large scale questions that we need answered. And so some of them will be straightforward, where surveys to determine occupancy will help us fill that gap, and others will need better information on, how is this species getting impacted by climate change? Are there limitations in the suitability of different habitats based on like water temperature, even those levels of information? But for some of them, just finding out whether or not it's in the state would be a really great start. Not sure if that helped answer the question, but.
Looks like you got a thumbs up there. So hopefully that was a good response. I'm going to jump to maybe an easy one for Carolyn. Will chapters and species list chapter drafts be provided well before meetings so proper review can take place?
Yes, that's certainly our intention. And that's exactly, the whole purpose of it is that we want you to have time to look at something. So I would say that we're aiming to release things with at least a week and hopefully more than a week ahead of meetings when that is possible. Understanding that sometimes things happen and people get caught up and time just goes by, but it is certainly our intention to make sure that there is enough time for folks to look things over before we hold those meetings.
Thanks, Carolyn. So there's a number of questions about the track process. So I'm going to just kind of read them, and maybe they could be responded to all together. How many meetings do we anticipate per track? How often will they meet? Will there be a limit on the number of track members? And when do we anticipate the first track meeting? And I'm not sure, Emily or Carolyn, who would like to answer that, but probably either one of you could.
I can do my best to answer the questions that I can answer. So I think that a lot of this is going to depend, which I know is not a satisfactory answer, but will depend on how the discussion is going and how the track ends up being put together based on the interest forms and things like that. So if it's a really narrow track and it's about one really specific thing, like that might just need one meeting and one discussion. But if it's a broader track that has that we're trying to cover a lot of information in, that might require a couple of different meetings. We are hoping, though, to not overwhelm folks. I know, we're asking for people's time, and it is a gift that you are spending your time with us, and we do understand that people are busy. So we're doing our best to try to make these go smoothly and quickly, and so that we can get the information that we're looking for in a timely fashion. I don't anticipate limiting the number of track members. We're doing that sort of in a way by using the interest forms, so that if there's a ton of interest, we might try to split those tracks into a more narrow focus to reduce the number of people. And we anticipate holding the first meeting sometime in February. Again, it depends a lot, though, on how much interest we get in specific topics.
Thanks, Carolyn. Emily, did you have anything to add?
I think Carolyn did a really great job of covering it. Just really underscoring that we're interested in this feedback. There are a lot of things that you guys will be able to provide more information on, and really our goal is the best product we can have. So as much time that we can take from you and as much review as we can get, I think it'll help us all get to a place that we're more confident in at the end. And so yeah, just working with you to get the best product we can. And being flexible with the length of different tracks and responsive to what kinds of information we need and what kind of feedback we're receiving to tailor those each appropriately.
Thanks. And then there's I guess a related question about the expectation regarding duration of participation and review from technical experts, given the upcoming field season. I could let you guys weigh in, but if I would say, of course, any time and review you could give is welcome, and certainly understand conflicts in other work you might have going on. But if you're not able to make these track meetings, of course, we always welcome your feedback through the comment form or by reaching out to Carolyn as well. Gonna skip around just a little bit. So it sounds like there will be an online form for folks who can't join the focus groups like we talked about. Will that information submitted through the form be made available to the focus groups so they can incorporate it into their thinking?
I can answer this one if you'd like, Carolyn.
Go for it.
My thought is absolutely. I think the more information we can provide to inform that conversation, the better. And so if you're only able to participate by submitting information through the form, we'll make sure that that has a place at the table. So yes, we'll be providing that information as much as we can.
Does this SWA provision incorporate ODFW's OCamp and the priority wildlife connectivity areas? And then if so, which tracks would someone be most interested in signing up for to review that?
I would say,
oh, you got it.
Oh, I was just going to say barriers to animal movement, the key conservation issue, is really addressing sort of what that project was about. So that's where I would direct folks. Emily, if you have something to add to that, go for it.
I think the other place that I would point folks towards, we didn't talk about it today, but one thing that we're working on is a complete overhaul of Compass. So a lot has changed in the way that we can use geospatial tools online since 2014, 2015, when we developed Compass. And so we're planning to bring that in-house, and part of that, of course, is the way that we visualize OCamp results and PWCAs and how we're presenting information in different layers to be supportive to our partners. So there's a couple of different places where folks can plug in there.
Thanks. So there's a question about whether Oregon Department of Agriculture staff are providing input regarding the threatened and endangered plant species. And I guess I might broaden that question just to maybe you could talk about how we're working with other agencies that have authority over both the plant species and invertebrate species.
Yeah, so we did reach out to Oregon Department of Agriculture and asked them about the plant species there, and they directed us to information that they have ready to go on the species that were added to the state list of threatened and endangered species this year, and we have incorporated those into the list of species for our swap. And we are still in the process of going back and forth and getting information from them, and we'll look forward to continue to working with them to get more information as we move forward into filling out more of the species profiles and other information available for those plants. And we've also reached out for invertebrates, also reached out to ODA, as well as the Xerces Society for some technical expertise to advise us on what should be listed and helping us assess those species. Again, for invertebrates, we're still sort of in the process of completing that assessment. And we'll also be hopefully looking for experts in those fields to help us again with species profiles and the information that we're providing for those species.
Thanks, Carolyn. And I see several comments about the survey form link being broken. So we will make sure that that is addressed promptly so we can get your information on the tracks in a timely fashion.
I think I'll just note, I think that there was maybe a update to the website happening while this meeting was happening. So hopefully that should get resolved quickly.
Thanks, Carolyn. There's a question about why Oregon, the word Oregon was taken out of the title, and suggesting it would be helpful to keep it in so it's not confused with other state wildlife action plans. So I guess I would just say we are most likely to refer to it as our SWAP. But if we're in the context of other states, we would say Oregon SWAP, which would be the Oregon State Wildlife Action Plan. So that would probably be part of the official title. But I don't know if Emily or Carolyn, you want to add anything to that?
No, yeah, I think that's right on.
Same.
Okay. The next question I have here, are you planning to seek consensus or alignment in the focus groups? And how will you determine what to incorporate in the draft from diverse conversations in the work groups, especially if there is not alignment?
I think that's a great question. And I will have to say that this is sort of our first time trying something like this. So I guess I don't know specifically how we will address that, but I think we're hoping to, at the very least, collect everyone's comments and get everyone's input, and then decide how we can utilize it. If there are wildly differing opinions, we might have to, take that another step further and try to get more information, or try to reach consensus in some way. But we do have other folks who are sort of helping us do some of the engagement stuff, and they might have some good suggestions on how to deal with something like that. I certainly don't have a lot of training in hosting meetings and doing that kind of thing. So this is definitely a learning process for me. So will probably be leaning on help from some of those folks if we run into situations like that.
All right. Is there any opportunity for additional species to be added to the SGCN or the SGIN lists? Maybe ask Emily to answer that one.
Sure. So one of the things that we're looking for from folks in helping us review our species of greatest conservation need and species of greatest information need is for you to help us make sure that we assessed everything. And so we reached out to both internal staff and external partners, including you guys, back early this year, asking, what species do you think are missing? So all of the ones that were submitted, we assessed. So our criteria included consideration of, let me open that up so I'm not just winging it. So we had 3 criteria for selecting a list of candidate species to assess for inclusion as an SGCN. And so it's either going to be because of its conservation status. So it has an elevated conservation status on some list, either ours or the Fed or IUCN Red List, or it's an elevated NatureServe rank, or any one of those things. Or if expert opinion suggested we should take a look at that species more closely, or if public or partners have requested that we take a look. And so if we haven't assessed a species and you think that we should be looking at it, that's absolutely something that we could talk about. And I think too that there is some wiggle room. Like, we're looking for to make sure that we have all of the relevant up-to-date information for these species. And maybe through this process, some of those question marks that we have that landed a species on the SGIN list will be resolved, and we'll be able to shift it off. Maybe we'll have some of those conversations that help us kind of tweak where things land. So I absolutely see that as an option, and that is in part what we're looking for. But we do want to make sure that we're saying we're starting with a list that we're asking for feedback on and working from there. We're not starting from scratch, and really just trying to work with you to make sure that we have all of the relevant up-to-date information, make sure that we didn't miss any species for assessment under those criteria, and to make sure that the species that do land on that list, we're providing the best quality information on threats and conservation actions.
Then this one might be a follow-up to that. How is the data review conducted to analyze and determine if there was or was not enough data available to determine if a species was an SGCN or not?
I need to look at that question. Is this in our... that from Sally Compton?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we went through a process where we had individual biologists within ODFW go through and do an assessment for looking into what information was available, trying to get a better understanding of, what's the current status. Could we say what the current status is? If it's getting heavily impacted by threats, and sometimes there's conflicting data, and that will lead us to a question mark. Sometimes, in the case of some species, we've only recently observed it in the state, and so that data review, and it's a little bit, it's been a moment since we did this, but was through a collaborative process with staff. We reached out to external partners that had expertise on some of these species as well, looking for some information and asking for species that we should take a look at. And so compiling all of the best information and then really comparing notes, like what does that look like? Making sure that in places that we disagreed, we could come to some resolution and talk through those differences and look through if we could find additional resources.
Thank you. Someone told me I'm on mute, and that I think this might be a question for Emily. Is there a role for data management systems such as the Avian Knowledge Network or other data clearinghouses in the SWAP discussions?
Sounds like a Jamie question. Absolutely. Let me see if I can find this in this list. I feel like that's phrased in a way where, yes, there's a role, data management and figuring out ways to access more information on some of these species where we have limited understanding is really helpful. And so certainly figuring out ways to both access the data and find ways to input the data in a way where we can share with partners information that we have. So I think those were really foundational to the way that we thought through what species were and were not at risk. So what data do we have on them? I think absolutely there's a role for those data management systems and a role for the information that we have on each of those species to inform outcomes. So we really are looking not just broadly, how is that species doing, but how is that species doing in Oregon?
Okay. This next question might be a little more specific. What sort of consideration is being given to the effects of rules of other groups, such as the Forest Practices Act, the Fish and Wildlife Threatened, Endangered, and Migratory Birds, DEQ's 1200C process, or the Oregon Department of Energy siting process?
Carolyn, you want to take this one or you want me to keep going?
Well, I'm not familiar with a lot of these in particular, but I would just say that because the SWAP is non-regulatory and we emphasize providing voluntary actions, we are sort of more focused on that side of things, but we, of course, incorporate information like this into the body of information that we provide on specific topics. Do you have something to add to that, Emily?
No, I think that that's right on. In a lot of ways, what we're trying to do is just really collate all of the information that's available. You included the U.S. Fish and Wildlife list of T&E species as well as their migratory list. I'm assuming you're talking about the birds of conservation concern. That list, those lists were included in, if it's on that list and it's within our geography, we will assess those species. So that got incorporated into our consideration for all of our SGCNs. And also, you know, we really want to make sure that while ODFW is leading this process and we are responsible for this process, we don't want it to just be ODFW's document. And we want to make sure that we're providing information on those resources as much as we can. So I think there are a couple of spots where we bring in Forest Practices Act and information on some of those other, you know, broad scale impacts. Like those are changing the way that we're conserving species across the landscape. And so providing information on those is helpful to that end user to make sure that they're equipped to answer the questions they have.
There are a few more questions specifically about species and habitats that I'm going to defer to our technical tracks. And in the interest of time, I know Carolyn has a few more slides to go through. So I will go ahead and turn it back over to Carolyn. And I do appreciate everyone's questions. And if we didn't get to yours, we can either follow up outside the meeting, or if they're appropriate for those technical tracks, that would be a good place to discuss them as well. And then just wanted to note there were some requests to email out the comment form. So if you've signed up for updates from on the website, that might be the best way to make sure you get a link to that comment form that you can circulate. And Carolyn, maybe we could send out that comment form link in an email after the meeting.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. I will turn it back to you. Thanks. Oh, and before I turn it back to you, Bob just put in the chat that the comment form has been corrected on the website, so folks should be able to use it now. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. Okay, so thank you everyone for your questions. That was really great. Now I'm going to go talk through quickly some of the next steps, and then we will go through that technical interest form, the track form, for those who want to see what that's going to look like. So the technical track form should be available now on the revision website. So please fill out the form by January 21st. And as I said, we'll be walking through that on the next couple of slides if that's helpful to you. And also, as we've been saying, you don't have to have filled out the form to continue to participate, but it is a key part in how we're going to form the meetings going forward. So please do fill it out if you have a chance. So our first track meeting will take place in February. And again, the scheduling of that depends a lot on the information we get back from the form. So we will be sharing meeting information and sending that out over email, posting it on the website, et cetera, when that is available. So as Bernadette said, you can sign up on the website to know when that gets updated there. And we'll also be sending that out to everyone. We anticipate that a species focus meeting will be one of the first offered. Emily discussed this a little bit, so please begin reviewing the species list in preparation for the species track. We will also be posting that to the website sometime after this meeting in the next couple of days. Once we schedule a species meeting, we will be soliciting review of the listing outcomes, asking for additional information that could support changing the outcome, and additional information on threats and conservation actions for species. So keep your eyes out for that. Please look out for more information as well on the March public outreach meeting. And again, we'll be posting updates for that on the website, over email, and through other outlets. In terms of how you can provide feedback, there is the open public comment form on the website. We also have the email inbox, and I'll remind you of the email address at the last slide. You can also sign up on the website to receive those email alerts every time the website gets updated. We are utilizing these features because it does help me to organize all of the questions and feedback that we get from all those different avenues, and get that information to where it needs to go. And just to note that there is a lot of interest and we expect to be inundated with that over the next few months. And so just please understand that that all comes to me and that I may not always be able to respond to all of your questions immediately, but I'm doing my best to get to everybody. And so for anyone who wants to see what the form looks like, here are a few slides covering that. I'm going to walk through for anyone who finds it helpful. If you don't want to stay for this, I'll just say thank you so much for your time. And I really appreciate your engagement and your patience with us. And I hope to see you again. And if you want to look at the form, here we go. So this is the first screen that you'll see when you open the form, and you'll see the question, are you representing a partner organization as a participant in the technical review of the swap? And this is a yes or no drop-down list. If you answer no, the form will change to display the normal comment box, and that's the way that you can still submit comments through this form. And if you answer yes, the form will change to display the options for the technical tracks. So that will take you here. You'll first see an option to indicate which topic area or areas where you or your organization has scientific information to contribute to the revision. And there is then a box to provide any details about how you can contribute to the area that you selected. And then as we keep going, some focal areas do have additional options that will display once they are selected. For example, by selecting key conservation issues, you will then have the option to select the specific KCIs that you have expertise in. If you select other, a box will display where you can add details on another area of the swap that is not in the current list that you have expertise in and would like us to consider holding a meeting on that specific topic. So again, I just want to reiterate that you may also choose not to attend these meetings and instead provide review of released content via the online comment form. And once the 21st passes, this form will revert back to a normal comment form. And this is also an option for anyone who may not be a technical expert in all of the fields. You might be an expert in one, but not another, but you still want to review that content. We would encourage you to use the comment form and review the content that way. And as I've mentioned, this is available on the website, the revision website. And to remind all of you what that is, here is the website information as well as the email for the revision inbox. And so please let us know if you have any further questions or anything that you need. And I'll just say thank you again, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.